I
Mr.
call
Chair?
the
Mr.
Honourable
Chair.
Clayton Cosgrove.
Shame.
It's always, I've got to say, a pleasure following that member. And before I continue in the positive vein that my colleague and again former Building and Construction Minister Shane Jones led with, could I just make a couple of comments about that member? That member's policy, and I'm sure the minister's aware of this, to solve the weather tightness problem was to ban, and she's in written form doing this, was to ban hydrogen dioxide or H2O. That member's claim to fame, of course, was to say things like, we're not borrowing to get the money, we're just going to get it from overseas. So that isn't actually relevant to the specifics of this bill, but that shows you the level of sort of intelligence we're dealing with over there. Now to get to a person of substance in the minister, can I say this? That the previous member made some comments about my stance about real estate agents, and she's right. Because I believe, as I think every member of this House believes this, that whatever occupation you're in, you should stand by your work. Okay? And I think when I was in the chair and the member said there were, I think, 11 and counting building and construction ministers. In fact, the place is littered with the bodies and corpses of building and construction ministers. Maurice Williams said to me before that he thinks we should set up a parliamentary friendship group for ex-building and construction ministers, and I agree. We're a large alumni and a powerful lobby. But where this actually came from, sir, and I do commend the minister for this on the DIY issue, that when I was in the chair, well, if the tumbleweed over there or just Taiho, when I was in the chair as minister, and I commend the minister for what he did. Well, no, I'm actually praising you, minister, if you just zip up and let me, Maurice has been waiting for this for weeks for me to say something nice about it. So zip up and let me compliment the minister. When I was in the chair, Mr Jones is right, when I was minister, the officials at a very senior level, I have to say, took a view, in my opinion, that they wanted to sort of cauterise all DIY work. And I took a view, and I'm pleased that the ministers found a way through it, but I took a view that that wasn't going to happen. It was not going to happen, and we threw out the anchors on it till there was a full and complete examination of this. But I think we do support the tenure of this bill. But, sir, you've had some comments about the piecemeal approach of it. Licensed building practitioners, that whole issue stems back from a time when a certain government abolished the Apprenticeship Act in 1995. That wasn't a Labor government, that was a National government. I think the minister in the chair at the time was now the Speaker, but putting that aside. So apprenticeships went, and then the building industry was deregulated. And the difficulty there, and I agree with Shane Jones, and I think the minister does, it would be nice not only to get to a point like electricians, where you could self-certify, and I suspect the history of that, and Mr Williamson might be able to assist me, was that self-certification and the tight regulations around that and the sort of visuality of that was because, if you put the wire in the wrong hole, you can get seriously dead, bluntly. Whereas there was I think, in respect of building, highly unlikely that a residential house, unless it's built to such a disreputable standard, will cause a fatality in that respect. I think, actually, if you look at the history of it, that's where it came from. But I'd go a step further, and I recall saying to the officials, it would be nice if once the transition through licensed building practitioners is complete, that you could get back to a time where you don't, as a young person, man or woman, get entry into those trades unless you do an old-fashioned thing called an apprenticeship, where you're trade trained. And I understand, because I was part of it and bringing it in, that there had to be a transitional period. There were builders, my own who built my house actually, third generation, no trade cert, won building awards all over New Zealand. I wouldn't want to see that guy go back and have to do an apprenticeship. He's proved through his work, and he's the sort of old-fashioned guy that if your hinges are squeaking 5 years later, he'll come round at no charge with the oil can. So I wouldn't want to see that person go through a sort of tirade of bureaucracy to prove what he has already, that he's a competent builder. But I'd like to see a time when we could go back, as we've transitioned through that, where if you as a young person want to get into the building trade or any trade, you've got to do an apprenticeship, and we go back and make that compulsory. I would say that, because I think it was a mistake to do away with apprenticeships and the resources around it, and it was a mistake historically, and we've all made them, to say that anybody could pick up a tool belt, even Jackie Dean, and call themselves a builder, whip round to your house and say, I can build your home. And then, as a previous speaker said, disappear to Queensland when it all goes wrong. So the regime I think that everybody wants is to allow DIY to progress in an orderly fashion, but to say to people, look, if you're outside your skill limit, as I would be, bluntly, I wouldn't attempt half the stuff, I'd just get the trades guys around, get them to do it. you should get licensed building practitioners in to do it, but not to cauterise DIY, Mr Chair.
Before I recognise the next speaker, I want to advise the House that the last time the committee considered the Customs and Excise Joint Border Management Information Sharing and Other Matters Bill, the vote on the question on the provisions standing part was incorrectly announced as ayes 119 and noes 1. The correct result is ayes 115, and noes 1. The record will be corrected. I recognise the Honourable Member Holly Walker.